So we talked about how contemporary biopolitics um, has become about this revolution in military affairs to the extent that I want to examine, I think, what's critical. And the new Rosetta Stone or the Philosopher's Stone has to deal with cracking the code of human um, genetics. And so this molecular revolution, because when you can do that, when you can change the very nature of humans, like look what we've done with vegetables and other creatures of the earth. Now, if we can do that with man, we don't have to worry so much about bullets and bombs as much as about changing the human being themselves. So that's the new Rosetta Stone. And that is the new cutting edge discourse in military affairs. So when we go to these ideas that were first a little flaky sounding with Foucault, so I stepped back to the 19th century and looked at the deep roots of these German and Swedish thinkers that were talking about living space and permanent expansion in relationship to the desired blood of that living space. And that's discourse we're familiar with from the Nazi project, but it still exists, just as the eugenics agenda still exists. It's just now called a certain form of bioscience or biopower or biopolitics, or usually it's part of a genetic discourse. Um, so I'm connecting it to esoterics, and we talked about the deep connections between the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition. Frances Yates would say, and she's particularly, she's one of the stand-up people that you think about connected with Oxford University and the study of Western esotericism. And she usually sees no difference between Hermetic Kabbalism and to that extent, you really see no difference with the school of Gnosticism or Rosicrucianism, the schools of Illumination, and the New Age traditions. They're all kind of together and have these same founding tenets. And that's what we read from McGee with those 7 tenets that God must be created. We're part of the participation. It's done through human will and apprehending a force in the universe. And who are going to be doing this? Mostly the adepts. Who are the adepts closely connected with? Well, the secret societies, ha ha ha. And those are always managed and controlled by the dominant oligarchs. And so what we're talking about is deep state um, agendas for managing human bodies, minds, and spirits. And so there's an esoteric connection and an eschatology, a way that they're bringing the events of the world. So they sponsor both sides of every war, not just to maximize profits, but this is part of the managed dialectics. Because when you have war economies, you're moving it through security and secrecy. You can also manage the perceptions of the monopolies you have on information. And you've been following these. This is probably getting a little repetitive, but I just want to open with this again. So Frances Yates, especially going to cite Gershom Scholem, who, according to Yates in the 20th century, stands out and remains one of the premier specialists in Jewish tradition, Hebrew scholarship, especially she's talking about here the Kabbalah or the Kabbalah. And I want to take this saying because we're saying, so what does this revolution in military discourse, this Rosetta Stone, the Philosopher's Stone of understanding who's going to dominate the globe in the 21st century? Is it going to be the people with the most factories, um, the most guns, the smartest military commanders? Well, when we look at the cutting edge of biopolitics, it's about who can finally figure out how to crack the genetic code and make the super soldier, the superhuman being, the super thinker, take us, transcend us. Like the Kabbalah would say in 1908, we have to assist and mediate in our own evolution. That's what this is all about. So the race is really about cracking our code. And that's where it gets esoteric, because that's what we're going to find out the Kabbalah has always been about. And that is what Byron Sherwin mentions here. And he's talking to a small interview audience in this case. I also mentioned this in his book, Byron Sherwin's The Kabbalah, An Introduction to Jewish Mysticism, Raven Press 2006. But he's going to mention here, and I quote, because he's saying a couple of these ideas, when you reveal them, sound a little crazy. So he's going to say, now, if this idea sounds very outlandish, consider, if you will, how we look at the new discoveries about genomics. The genome is presented as being represented with the four archetypes of which we are all composed, these four archetypes. They are represented by four letters: G, A, T, and C. And the combination and recombination of those letters leads us to knowledge, hopefully, of how to cure disease and even how to create life. So I just said something mind-blowing if that blew past you, but through the combination and recombination, this is alchemy. Okay, so again, the analogy is mixing and mixing letters, but it's metals, but it's really about creating and tinkering with our own beings, the individual and the collective being. If you're looking at a macro level, so you're tinkering this and that, beating in order to purify. And the end game is here, even how to create life. This is essentially the exact same ideas you find in the commentaries of the Tree of Life, and in certain Jewish mystical texts. And we're talking about the creation, especially of the golem, which is made of clay, and the rabbi brings it to life. Sort of, again, reverse engineering this concept, esoteric concept of a Big Bang. I won't call it a scientific concept because it has zero empirical weight behind it that you can find through measurement and discovery, but it's an esoteric concept of nothing becoming something. So they're in fact actually trying to construct a Big Bang, bring life to inanimate matter. That's what the whole project is all about. All these traditions, all the societies, that's the end game, bringing life to an inanimate object. And can it even be done then? We're wondering, can this even be achieved? Who gives life? In this accidental worldview where humans assist in their own evolution and transformation, you don't need much of a brain to just stop and ask yourself this whole scientific fake narrative of everything begins from nothing when that's scientifically impossible. It's all held together by a fiction of people inside the cave that just can't stop, just like standing in front of ficus on a canvas in a modern art museum and saying, who comes up with this stuff? It's the person that obviously controls the money supply and controls the museum and controls the art critics that talk about it. And hopefully people just don't dare to say that shit on a canvas. So that's where it's going. It's an esoteric alchemical process of combining and recombining codes. And it parallels the scientific discoveries in the genetic revolution, again, for the military discourse, not to get a bigger bullet, but to find out how to tap into that human code. And it's also about the cybernetics revolution. Again, you can do it two ways. You can, make the human into the machine, or you can make the machine into a human and bring it in, have sentience. So, or you can combine the human being and the machine. So this is where all this transhumanist discourse of the merger of the inanimate and the organic, and they come to life somehow in a new and magical way, and there'll be this collective. And I don't talk about current events, but flip on the TV if that ain't happening right now with AI. And I'll start popping up events. It's daily almost right now. Someone's trying to make a religion out of AI or sell this idea, shit on a canvas to us. So in light of this Golem project, Lily Kay explains, and this is from her book, Who Wrote the Book of Life? And she also, and who wrote the Book of Life, this is a fabulous researcher that I highly suggest people get familiar with, Lily E. Kay, who wrote the Book of Life. That's from Stanford University Press, 2000. She also wrote the Molecular Vision of Life from Caltech. That's the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rise of New Biology. They're bringing together all the parts. She's talking about the Rockefeller Foundations, the oligarchs, you got, the Rothschilds with the financial piece, and the Rockefellers with all the culture and the image management piece. And then in order to do that, they're going to have all their foundations and control their scientific research. Where did she say she poured all the money into? They poured it into this genomics. even though it had no empirical weight, and the project seemed increasingly, as we'll find out, to go nowhere. But these oligarchs are putting all their money into, and essentially, she's not using this terminology, but they're putting it into their esoteric eschatology. So, um, Lily Kay will explain, please hang with me, this is good stuff, that genetic information signifies an emergent form of biopower. The material control of life would now be supplanted by the promise of controlling its life form and logos, its information and DNA sequence or words. So here's where we get the merger of the Kabbalah, the esoteric, and the revolution of military forms. Who's going to dominate the world? Or if it is the oligarchs that tend to dominate the world, how do they see this next level of total domination? And I'll repeat, it's through genetic information, which is signifying the emergent form of biopower. She only uses this word once in the entire text. The material control of life would now be supplanted. The material control of life. The oligarchs have always kind of control the resources, the schools, the media. The material control of life would now be supplanted by the promise, their eschatology, of controlling its life form and logos, its information, the DNA sequence, or the word. I think I added that. So they want to control the logos. And that stands in contradiction to a biblical narrative. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word. They want to control the Word, the code, the A, the G, the C, the logos. They want to be the creator, the logos. The Bible begins with John 1:1. In the beginning was the logos. So they have the promise of the logos. The great work is the promise. This is where they're going with this. So whether or not they're working with molecules or letter sequences, it's all code. It can be on a computer program to make that computer sentient, to give it a mind and a soul and emotions to dominate. So perhaps people will kneel to the image of the beast, or they can manipulate our DNA to bring us to a place where we can collectively be part of some transcendent project. So, however, DNA is not a natural language, says Kay. This is empowering to us, those people that aren't the oligarchs, the people that are okay just being human and can accept another alternative plan for transcendence. But I like where she's going with this. However, DNA is not a natural language. So, Sholem here is all the hot shot Kabbalists. You see, you just deal with the just play here. He's saying with the G, the A, the T, combining, recombining, and not only can we, cure all these diseases that you don't have to research much, the oligarchs generally caused in the first place, but even to create life, how pompous to create something from nothing. And she's saying here, there's a problem, because code, what is code? What are these letters you're trying to manipulate? So listen to this. Kay says, thus, beyond the control of bodies and populations, that's Agamben, Foucault, all the way back to the geostrategists of empire, controlling bodies and populations. So beyond control of the bodies and the populations in their material messiness, people are messy. They have their own ideas. Sometimes they want to do their own things. How do you control? You have to have managers to control the systems of information and economics. Beyond the control of all that material messiness and physical contingencies, you create a system, you want them to do that, and they get that information that you fed them. Instead, they kind of do that. And you have to have a contingency plan to control them if that happens. And you have to input new algorithms for another level of control. Genomic power promises new levels of control over life through the pristine meta level of information. So this is where this is all going at a collective. They needed the internet to kind of control that meta level, to take it to, as we said, in Hegel and in the Hermetic text, um, that they have to have control of complete speech. Man is perfected through gnosis. He becomes empowered through the possession of complete speech. And another way of saying that in the Enlightenment project would be through a world encyclopedia or encyclopedia of the mind. So you can put it either all in here, or we'd all participate through the beehive in this encyclopedic speech. It's a crazy idea, but okay. So at the same time, they needed the internet to be part of this encyclopedic beehive of world knowledge that was accessible. It also liberated some of us who did some researching on the internet to kind of figure out, now they're rolling it all out anyway, so all you have to do is ask the questions. You don't have to be a great researcher. You just have to get off your duff. But she is going to say here, the new promises of levels of control of life through the pristine meta level of information, the world brain, or Teilhard would say in mid-century, the Jesuit paleontologist. He would talk about, the beginning of this world mind, but what is it? And of course, by the 1990s, Teilhard is so brilliant. He talked about the internet. Well, he's an insider talking about the esoteric project of creating the world brain, the complete speech, which is one of the tenets of Hermetic Kabbalism. So, so he's supposed to be posed as some sort of brilliant man, which he is just kind of a PR person for this project. And of course, it's going to require something like the internet. Okay, so through control of the word, see, here's what's interesting. Through control of the word, these letters, E, G, C, through combining and recombining an alchemical process until you get something out of nothing, or turn lead into gold, or turn a human being into a god. Through control of the word, or DNA, sequences the techno-scientific imaginary and discursive practices that animate them. So again, through control of the word, and again, if you're thinking that there was a creator and there was a logos at the beginning, and there's only one entity that stands outside of creation, these people are trying to replace that, or they're working for an entity that's trying to replace the logos, that's trying to, rise himself above the heavens and so forth, if you look at the biblical narrative. So the meta level of information through control of the word or DNA sequence, the techno-scientific imagery and discursive practices that animates them, specifically the textual and linguistic representations of the genome, are quite old. So she's hinting there that what they're doing, it goes all the way back to the mystery schools. And in some ways, whether you call the Tower of Babel a Stargate or whatever, it's this idea of this forces, this Gnostic, bringing all knowledge together and concentrating it. So again, at that time, God said, if they can do that, speak of one mind, one tongue, with one economy, and great, they can do anything. So God seemed to be concerned that it might be possible, or the time wasn't just right. So we're really seeing, a re-engineering of either the logos itself. So it's not like when they're trying to rebuild it, they can bring everybody together into the one world economy and the one world religion and have us of one mind and all speaking in digital code and virtual sequencing. But you can also reverse engineer the logos, right? You can look at the creation that the creator provided and re-engineer that if they're able to. So where does Kay leave off with this? After a century, this is my thinking, when you read her two books, The Molecular Vision of Life, Caltech and the Rockefeller Foundation, and who wrote the Book of Life. So she's saying of having all of the money possible from the Rockefellers and whomever else at the commanding heights of the world economy was throwing at this, go for the molecular, go for the sequencing, bam these letters together, re-engineer the code. And part of that, you'd have to be thinking in the back of mind, if something came from nothing, if you really believed that, then the end game of reverse engineering the code would be nothing. But if you realize that it was the fingerprint of a creator, then you could reverse engineer something. So you might want to really think if they really believed that something became from nothing. But okay, so after a century of funding from the Rockefeller, Carnegie's, et al. Foundations, together with the deep state complex, that's the military industrial and people that brought us the internet and CERN and all these other things, the philosopher's stone of cracking the code to controlling human lives and mastering world affairs in the 21st century remains elusive. Kay explains, though interchangeable, the two concepts, specificity and information, did not directly map onto each other. And she's just talking about the promise in the 1950s, the cybernetic revolution in the 1960s. They thought they almost had that code cracked. And you remember the discovery of DNA, and we can control everything. And so they're looking by the 1980s and the 1990s. And then there was the Human Genome Project, which around the turn of the century, aha, the Rosetta Stone, we've cracked it. We're going to, we will be gods. But she's looking at, she's kind of asking some serious questions about their methodology. The discrepancies reside in the categorical differences between the two. Again, she's talking about specificity and information. The discrepancies reside in the categorical differences between the two, specifically denoting material and structural priorities. Information denoting non-material attributes such as soul. Potentialities and form, telos, previously captured by the notion of organization and plan, logos. So hence, the search continues. So they're going to continue with their alchemical process of turning lead into gold, moving us from the 5th level to the 7th level. So perhaps we can find our Ubermensch that will lead us into, at least the adepts, into their collective transcendence, or their neo-feudal world where they can live forever with microchips and lord over the earth. However, there's one problem. And they were able to lord over so long through information because they used the paradigm of behavioralism, and they treated human beings like machines or computers, information in, information out, and they found fantastic results and able to dumb down society and have most of us in an essentially zombified state. However, to really reach that moment of apotheosis, you start to ask real hard questions when you think of if all you can do is re-engineer to the point of becoming a creator. Again, it's like looking at shit on a canvas. You just have to ask yourself, is this really, this is one phenomenal, transnational, transhistorical delusion. There's no way you can do that. So all the people participating in this are really the jokers, okay? Because you can't make a soul. Only a soul, unless you don't believe this in its material perspective, I can't convince you that human beings have souls. I can't do it. But assuming we have a soul, or we're spiritual beings, and that's what brought the universe into existence was spirit that spoke, that had the logos and created it. How can you re-engineer that, reverse engineer that? And she says, you can't. They've had all the money and all the talent now for a century. and information and specificity don't work together because of these intangibles. Potentiality. Now, they can do it pretty well with grains, chickens, and I don't doubt that they've done a lot with MK mind assassin programs, etc. And I think that they're probably doing a lot with super soldiers. But that's why they have to go post-human, because they can't make a soul, and a soul makes a person. So they're going to have to move to the level of making a real fanciful machine. But still, the quest to find and create a sentient machine is just as elusive as to make a soul for a human being, because that's what we are. We're souls, and we're filled with potentiality. And the ultimate potentiality we find in the humbleness of being human and allowing the Creator to work his path toward our transcendence instead of the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all the powers and illuminated ones that stand behind them. So we're going to continue fine-tuning all of these elements of the deep state biopolitics and its esoteric eschatology, because as we even tune in even more, we begin to see that this is not disempowering at all. That in fact, their quest to control are quite silly. The one thing that we have to realize is that you can never give up your mind and your code, because you can lose your soul in the process. This has been Dr. Deep State. Thank you very much.